What does it mean to be Black and Catholic? Catholic, it means that I come to my church fully functioning. That doesn't frighten you, does it? I come to my church fully functioning. I bring myself, my Black self, all that I am, all that I have, all that I hope to become. I bring my whole history, my traditions, my experience, my culture.
But tonight I want to tell you a story about a very, very special woman. And you all know from TV and everything else that we're in an era of finding your roots and Ancestry.com and all of that. And we've come to learn that each person is the result of many relationships that have come before. In America, Sister Thea Bowman's known family tree began with her great-grandparents. The great-grandparents on both her paternal and her maternal sides were slaves. And obviously, as you will tell from the story, that there was a thirst for knowledge and the care of others that was passed down through Thea's mother and father from these parental figures that came before. Sister Thea's father, Theon Edward Bowman, received a medical degree in 1918 from the first medical program for African Americans in the U.S. It was Nashville's Meharry Medical School. And he moved to Canton, Mississippi, because there was a large Black African American community there that had no doctor. Thea's mother, Mary Esther, followed her mother Lizzie's example. Lizzie Coleman taught in public schools for 47 years and served as principal of the largest colored school in Greenville, Mississippi. Yeah. Mary Esther, Thea's mother, went to college and became a teacher also and taught in Greenville's public schools. Now, Dr. Theon Bowman and teacher Mary Esther Coleman were members of the respected professional middle class of the Black community there in the Mississippi Delta. Their marriage was a social event. The ceremony was performed on the lawn of a lovely home and was the integration of their Episcopalian and Methodist traditions. The couple went directly to Canton after their marriage, where the doctor had his practice. Thank you notes were sent with a New York postmark thanks to Theon's uncle, who mailed them from New York on his return home. So everyone thought they honeymooned in New York. It was their little joke, you know. This story may seem a little out of joint with what we know about race relations in the South, and especially in the state of Mississippi at the time. Though it may seem these folks were upper middle class, and they were, they still had to keep their place in Southern society at the time. Mississippi was the poorest state, and strict segregation was a fact of life. The Bowmans had to navigate their way around so as not to provoke trouble. Jim Crow was alive and well in the Mississippi civil as well as church life. As an aside, the Emancipation Proclamation passed Congress in 1863, but Mississippi ratified the 13th Amendment in 1995. That's a few years in between there. However, the state did not file the correct paperwork. An immigrant who saw the movie Lincoln in 2012 got curious and discovered the fact. And the paperwork was then resubmitted, and the amendment was officially ratified in 2013. Tells you a little bit about Mississippi. Not that I want to put any state down, but that's baby Bertha, which is Thea's given name, was born 13 years into their marriage. Theon was 43 years old, and Mary Esther was 35. In this era, she was considered too old to be a first-time mother. Thea later would describe herself as an old folks' child. Bertha's parents were delighted to welcome this baby into their family. She was doted on, of course. Mary Esther wanted a proper, well-behaved daughter, sweet and cultured, a sweet little lady, but what she got was a little rowdy, it said. And she could be a handful. She had her own mind. She loved to tease and could be naughty. When she was 10 or 11 years old, her mother, who was petite, attempted to spank her for something she had done. And Bertha said, "I hope you realize the only reason you're doing this is because I'm standing here letting you." But she was an eager learner, and she grew spiritually from her rich exposure to the spirituality of her people. I got a thing here. This is a book of the writings of Thea Bowman. And number 1 here, it says, "Growing up in Canton, Mississippi, I was what folks called an old folks child. My parents were older, and I spent a lot of time around their friends who were grandparents and great-grandparents, and they made a deliberate effort to teach me about life. From their music, stories, faith, traditions, and love, I learned religious, cultural, and survival values. I was taught to do my best, try my hardest, and keep striving up the ladder. But at each rung, I was to reach back and help a brother or a sister or a stranger receive the gift and pass it on, and thus create a more caring, sharing world. Although our town had segregated neighborhoods and schools and is still considered depressed because of the high proportion of poor people, I knew people who lived rich lives and continued to inspire me. One such person was Mother Ricker, known for her love of children. She would have 20 or 30 children at her house and would lead us in songs like Jacob's Ladder, Go Down Moses, and all the Negro spirituals. She had an unlimited repertoire of music and taught us the meaning of the words, and as she lived, the values of the songs. Then she'd feed us and send us home. The Mississippi bishops were constantly trying to attract religious orders of both men and women to come and help, because theirs was missionary territory. The Bishop of Natchez secured a priest, Father Lawrence, from the missionary servants of the Most Holy Trinity and assigned him to Canton. There was a white church community already established there, and the bishop wanted to establish a black community, a Catholic church. After an extended struggle, Father Lawrence bought land for a church and related buildings. It was called Frog Hollow. You can imagine what the land was like. It was not ideal, but it was the only land that the people of Canton would sell him. So he moved in an old army barracks, which would be transformed into a chapel, a clinic, and a kindergarten, and more barracks would come later. Father Lawrence and some others of his order secured a group of sisters to come and help. They were 2 missionaries and a nurse. They were not school teachers, but the parish community had identified education for their children as goal number 1. So the search was on to find a group of Catholic sisters to staff the school. It took a while. Eventually, through a campaign of letter writing and visiting back and forth, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration from La Crosse, Wisconsin, 1,000 miles to the north, agreed to come to Canton and teach the children of Holy Child Jesus Mission. I've got another one here. In the summer of 1948, 4 sisters, including a musician and a nurse, arrived to staff the new school known as Holy Child Jesus. 3 of the sisters would teach, while the nurse would operate the clinic and perform housekeeping duties. By the start of 1948-49 school year, 95 students were registered, most of whom were not Catholic. They came from many Protestant traditions. Some were children of ministers and leaders in their respective churches, while others had no church affiliation. The families were all attracted to the new school for one reason: the possibility of a better education and future for their children. Before opening the school, excuse me, I gotta get a swig of water. Before opening the school, the sisters spent time visiting homes and recruiting students. The sisters felt it was important to build relationships with their neighbors. All of this took time. The Black community desperately wanted quality education for their children, and they were willing to entrust their children to these Catholic sisters from so far away to the north. Mary Esther knew that Bertha was reading below level. Mary wanted her to be ready when she went to high school, so she enrolled Bertha in the new school when it opened. And this is Bertha's words. Because my mother wanted me to have a chance in life, she sent me to a Catholic school. The Black public schools were tremendously disadvantaged and understaffed. At the Black Catholic school, I remember using books given to us by St. Angela's School in Iowa and Aquinas with La Crosse, Wisconsin. We shared gym clothes with students in Breda, Iowa. The sisters begged a lot. And because they did, the school was much better supplied. Men and women all over the country gave $1 or $2 to help us get an adequate education. There were 72 of us in grades 1 to 6. The highest reading level was 1.7, under 2nd grade level. When Sister Mildred Berger became my teacher, she put me through 8 levels of Think and Do books in 1 year. Do any of you remember Think and Do books? Yeah. I was learning and enjoying it. My friends and I were challenged every day to learn and to help someone else. I was poor in math, so someone had to coach me. I was good in reading, so I had to help someone else. We didn't realize it, but we were learning to cooperate and to build community. Okay, Bertha was so impressed with the example of these priests and sisters that she wanted to become a Catholic. So she was baptized at age 9. In a TV interview with Joe Smith in Madison, Wisconsin, she said, "It was not the liturgy that drew me. It was not theology or doctrine. I didn't know anything about that at age 9. It was the witness of Catholic Christians who were really making a difference in people's lives that made me interested in the Catholic Church. And her conversion was so powerful that it inspired her parents to follow some years later. And these nuns, they collected clothes, and they had a little store where people could come and buy clothes, something like Vincent de Paul, and then the nuns would go into the homes, pick up the little babies and hold them in their arms, and I mean they were wonderful. It was when it was time to begin high school, Bertha had made it known that she wanted to go to St. Rose High School at the mother house of the Franciscan sisters at La Crosse. In other words, she wanted to join the community. Her parents said an emphatic no and thought that was the end of the discussion. In response, Bertha refused to eat. Finally, her parents were forced to give in. Her father said, "They're not going to like you up there, the only black in the middle of all those whites." And Bertha's response was, "Daddy, I'm going to make them like me." And a friend of Thea's and a student, Father Maurice Nutt, wrote this about her experience. The future Sister Thea, while excited to see her first snowfall, found the brutal Wisconsin winters challenging, and she missed the typically warm seasons of the year in her beloved South. Bertha also missed her mother's home-cooked meals. The food served in the convent was mostly from Germanic and Irish cultural cuisines. She probably never became accustomed or enjoyed the unfamiliar fare she was served, but she ate the fodder for the sake of sustenance. One thing is for sure, the convent food was bland and lacked the southern seasoning so familiar to Bertha. Bertha knew she had to prove herself. She was mindful that she had to make do and fit in as a black young woman. She also had to exceed all expectations. Think about it. The pressure must have been great. At the time, historically white religious communities were beginning to accept black candidates. Another little thing here. Some of the religious communities had missions in urban and rural black communities, and thus they attracted vocations. However, most, if not all, white religious communities were ill prepared to receive African American aspirants. While their intentions may have been good, they typically had no understanding of the history, culture, or religious experiences of the black community. Due to this lack of understanding, they most often lacked cultural sensitivity, and racial prejudices went unchecked. After Bertha finished high school in 1955, she began to study at Viterbo College in La Crosse. In 1956, she was formally received into the Franciscan community. She took the name Sister Mary Thea, which Thea means of God, and it is also derived from her father's name, Theon. On completion of her religious formation, she was assigned to teach in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where only 21 out of the nearly 46,000 people were identified as black. Parents of the school objected to a black nun coming to teach their children, but neither the head of the order nor the principal would back down. Gotta give them credit. Ultimately, Thea won them over with the rapport she developed with her students and their families. After 2 years teaching at this school, she was assigned to Canton, Mississippi, her hometown. As a way to engage her students who were not committed to learning, she chose to incorporate music, poetry, and art forms involving movements such as dance and drama, even the Sunday comics. She had a group of boys that wouldn't write. So she would bring the Sunday comics in, they would read the comics, and then she would have them write the story. So, and then she also directed a choir which produced an album. Here's this one here. To overcome obstacles facing some children, Sister Thea believed it was important for schools to provide a conducive environment for students to learn and thrive. As she said, our children are longing to be loved. They have to know they are somebody. We have to create within our schools an environment in which every child is special. She decorated the walls of her classroom with pictures of Black biblical figures and African saints, so that her students could not only learn about them, but be reminded of the contributions of holy people of color. Sister Thea knew how important it was for children to have confidence in themselves and believe in their abilities. She wanted schools and parents to convey the message, you are somebody because you are God's child. During summers, while Sister Thea taught in Canton, she returned to Viterbo College to continue study for an undergraduate degree in English with a minor in speech and drama. She finished that degree in 1965, graduating magna cum laude. Her superiors, recognizing that she was intellectually gifted, sent her to Washington, D.C., to the Catholic University of America to begin a master's degree of arts in English and eventually her doctorate. Washington, D.C. was a very different experience for her. Up to this time, she had lived only in Canton, Mississippi, which had a large, poor Black population, quite separate from the white population, and in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which the population was almost entirely Black or white. Her friend and student, Father Nutt, writes, what was novel for her was these Black Washingtonians were neither typically Southern nor rural. The Black community in Washington was a conglomeration of upper middle class, working poor and very poor, well-educated and poorly educated, business owners and those employed in every occupation imaginable, those who were Muslim, Buddhist, Protestants of all denominations, and unbelievers. What piqued Thea's interest most was a cause of her joy and excitement was that she found in Washington a large Black Catholic community. While living in D.C., Thea experienced something that would impact her life and future ministry. An African friend committed suicide. This friend had tried to share her feelings with Thea, but Thea did not see that her friend was in trouble, and she deeply regretted not being present or realizing the confusion and pain her friend was in. The suicide was so devastating for her that she resolved to be present to those in need of her time and attention and to genuinely listen to words spoken and unspoken. Empathy became a deep-seated virtue of Thea's for the rest of her life. From then on, she began to open up. She had never been reclusive, as you know from her early stories, or withdrawn, but she felt a need to be her authentic self. She realized there was no dichotomy but between being a vowed religious woman and a strong, conscious Black woman. Between the shock of her friend's suicide and the blatant racial injustices of the 60s, Thea was jolted to be her beautiful Black self and to teach and preach about the richness and giftedness of her Black cultural heritage. During this time in DC, Sister Thea was a founding member of the National Black Sisters Conference and attended inaugural meeting in Pittsburgh in 1968. She was ready to provide vision and leadership for this determined group of Black religious women and share their gifts, her wisdom, and her infectious joy. This group provided support and encouragement that sustained her for the rest of her life. The gathering of like minds, shared visions, and collaborative support impelled her to tell her story. This is a quotation. The story of her people's sorrow and joy, struggle and strength, and their quest and demand for justice. She would use what God had given her voice in spoken and sung word, her mind and its astute intelligence, her capacity for creativity and cleverness, her spirit and spirituality that witnessed her walk with God, and her body that dramatically painted pictures and drew attention to her joy, inner peace, and abundant love. More and more, she was invited to give lectures on Negro spirituals and the literary tradition that passed down in the Black communities by word of mouth. Thea was asked by the Catholic University of America to teach Black literature on campus. In May 1969, she received a Master of Arts degree in English from the university and then turned her attention to studying for her doctorate. On finishing her doctoral studies, Thea returned to La Crosse to teach at Viterbo College. She taught courses in English, Black literature, and history. She was a noted authority on Sir Thomas More and William Shakespeare, as well as Southern writers like Eudora Welty and William Faulkner. She eventually became head of the English department at Viterbo. During her tenure there, she reached out to students from a Native American Winnebago tribe. And in 1975, she offered a course on Native American literature. Thea brought in a Native American couple from the local Winnebago tribe. The course included writings, poetry, and history, and in it the students visited Wisconsin Winnebago sites and were exposed to the culture through song, traditional songs, and dances and readings. Sister Thea's philosophy of education was that education needed to be interactive and participative. For example, she took students studying Faulkner and Welty to the southern sites to learn more about these writers in the places that influenced their works. Those studying Shakespeare went to see performances in various cities, and Sister Thea also included trips to her hometown of Canton, where many students experienced for the first time the realities of the Deep South. Sister Thea's emphasis on experiential learning gave her students new perspectives. Because of her teaching methods, she was a successful and sought-after teacher. To her students, she was a caring, devoted, and supportive teacher who brought enormous vitality to the classroom. She continued to offer lectures on Negro music and culture in surrounding areas. She organized a group of singers called the Hallelujah Singers, which, although they were predominantly white, they performed Negro spirituals with Thea as their leader and guide. She believed that her culture and enriching music was a gift not to be hidden, but to be shared with others. Gradually, requests grew from a regional level to a national level. She kept her audiences mesmerized by her uncanny ability to have her listeners at the same time intrigued by her knowledge, delighted by her folksy Southern humor, and tearful as her singing and preaching reached deep into their memories and feelings. In 1978, Thea returned home to Canton to take care of her ailing parents. Before leaving La Crosse, she applied to the Diocese of Jackson, Mississippi for a job. And of course, Bishops Brunini and Hook, both of whom knew Thea, were delighted. Here was a gift to the diocese. They encouraged her to join the diocesan staff and gave her a job of consultant to and then director of the Office of Intercultural Awareness, knowing that Thea would grow the job from there. But even as Thea remained faithful to caring for her aging and infirm parents, the demands for her preaching, teaching, wisdom, and leadership emerged to an emerging Black Catholic community, and consciousness were increasing. In an effort to balance her involvement in the diocese and beyond with the care of her parents, Thea found she needed help. She had developed a close friendship with one of the sisters at Holy Child Convent. Sister Dorothy, also known as Dort, would look in on Dr. and Mrs. Bowman while Thea was away. Sister Thea was popping up all over the place, traveling and speaking in many places around the South. Oops. Thea's ability to communicate was key. She was known for assessing a situation before she moved forward, and when she spoke at conferences in ballrooms or auditoriums, in church halls, church basements, in boardrooms, or in classrooms, she posed simple questions with important answers in her disarming Southern folksy manner, told stories with significant moral lessons, and always sang, in ways that diffused tension and made spectators into participants. This is important here. Thea always told what she called the true truth. She told her audiences what needed to be said. Her confidence in herself and in her messages came from a place of prudent discernment, fervent prayer, and above all, plain old common sense. But that true truth comes up in Thea's writing and experiences often. She told the bishops the true truth, which we'll talk about later. The Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University of Louisiana, the only historically Black Catholic university in the nation, was a second home for Thea. The university developed a 3-week summer session devoted to history, theology, spirituality, psychology, culture, and aesthetics for people in ministry. I don't know how they fit all that into 3 weeks. Do you have any? It was at this program that Thea taught many ministers, Catholic and otherwise, how to preach. She taught them to be aware of their bodies. To one guy, she said, he got up and gave a speech, and then she said to him, "You have beautiful eyes." But he hadn't looked out to the congregation once, and so he learned a lesson that he was supposed to look out and let the people see his beautiful eyes. So anyway, at the 1984 Louisville Archdiocesan Liturgical Conference, she said, "Make the liturgy come alive, be colorful, be bright. What we're talking about is freeing the spirit. We have to make the kind of joyful noises your children like to hear. That's how to free the spirit. In New York City, she told religious education teachers, faith is not taught, it's caught. Little children don't understand all we say, but they do and will remember the witnesses of their parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents. In Beaumont, Texas, she expounded on the sacramental celebration in the Black community. This is good. The church was a newspaper where you collected the news about your neighbors every Sunday after services. The church was also the fashion show where you came to show off your new dress or suit, and you always came in late to be seen. The church was the economy institution. When a member's home was burned, the pastor would pass the plate for a collection to help the member find a new place to live. Listen to this. The doors were locked and the plate was passed continuously until the amount of money the pastor requested was raised. The church was the educational institution. The church was the political institution. This is where the civil rights movement began. As Black Catholics, we need to see our own in a spirit of unity. We need to pray that God will send us our own priests, sisters, bishops, directors of music to administer to our people and the church. Until this comes to pass, we are second-class Catholics. In the 1980s, sisters of many communities changed their religious garb to a more modern clothing. But Thea took this a step further. She began to wear traditional African robes. She said, I'm different. My clothes are an expression of my personality, an expression of my values, an expression of my history, my culture, my tradition. I am a Black traditional person. I just have to say something. Her religious community must have been wonderful. You know, they were just so open to allowing the individuality of this woman to show forth. And it really makes me, I come from a religious community background, and my community would not have been that open. So in the spring of 1984, Thea noticed a lump in her breast. Dort came to visit her in the hospital and said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And Thea responded, "Yes, move in with me and help me take care of my parents." Dort said, "Okay." Dort made sure that each one got to their doctor's appointments and Thea to her chemotherapy treatments. Eventually, she was relieved of her teaching assignment and was full-time at the Bowman household. She took care of everything. Thea continued to respond to requests for her to speak whenever she could. That's another example of the community's openness. In November 1984, Mary Esther, Thea's mother, passed away. Her father was in the hospital because of a stroke, and her father passed away a month later. In June of 1985, Thea and Dort moved back to the convent to be once again with their community. Thea resumed her hectic schedule. She edited a book, Families, Black and Catholic, Catholic and Black. She continued teaching at the Black Catholic Studies program at Xavier University in New Orleans. She attended the Eucharistic Congress in Nairobi, Kenya, a gift from her friends, and that was a homecoming for her, a time of healing from the death of her parents and another friend. In May of 1987, 60 Minutes featured a segment on Thea. Mike Wallace and the crew filmed her on location wherever she was. They just followed her around. Wallace reflected, "I don't remember when I have been more moved, more enchanted by a person whom I've profiled than by Sister Thea Bowman. Just one session with this remarkable individual convinced me her openness, her compassion, her intelligence, her humor captured me." And he wrote in one of the books I have here, he wrote the foreword to the book. She delivered a major address at the National Black Catholic Conference in 1987 called History and Culture. She contributed a scholarly historical treatise on sacred music and a riveting commentary that celebrated the creative genius of Black people. She sang, "Lord, I Want to Be a Christian," just before Pope John Paul II was to exit the New Orleans Superdome in 1987. In May of 1989, she was invited to give a commencement address and receive an honorary degree from Xavier University of Louisiana. She told the graduates, "Be upwardly mobile, but make sure that what you're climbing for is worth having. What are you going to do to alleviate poverty? What are you going to do to teach children, to comfort the elderly, to mold public policy for the better of the world? How will you serve humanity?" Less than a month later, and only months before her death, she addressed the U.S. Catholic bishops. She was invited by the Black Catholic bishops to speak to their brother bishops about the concerns of Black Catholics and to urge the bishops to support the pastoral plan of action, which was up for discussion. Facing the bishops in her wheelchair 2 months before she died, Thea began her presentation by asking, "What does it mean to be Black in the church and society?" She immediately answered her own question by breaking into song and singing, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child," which describes the powerlessness and trials of the slaves. Thea spoke to the bishops as a sister, having a heart-to-heart conversation with her brothers. She told them the true truth about what it means to be Black and Catholic. She instructed and enlightened the bishops on African American history and spirituality. She challenged the bishops to continue to evangelize the Black African community, to promote inclusivity and full participation of Blacks within the church leadership, and to understand the necessity and value of Catholic schools in the African American community. She asked, "Do you hear me, church?" At the end, she asked the bishops to draw close, lock arms together, and sing, "We Shall Overcome." And when they finished, she received from them a thunderous applause and more than a few flowing tears. That was a miracle. That fall and winter, everyone became aware that Thea's time was drawing to an end. Everyone who knew her or was associated with her wanted to check on her and to finally say goodbye. She died on March 30th, 1990. Her friend Dort was with her and held her. Thea had planned every detail of her wake and funeral, and she was buried next to her parents at the historic Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee. The epitaph she requested was inscribed on her tombstone. She tried. It was the true truth. She tried very hard. Sister Thea was declared a servant of God on May 15, 2018, which initiated the process of her canonization. On November 14th, 2018, at their fall assembly, the U.S. bishops voted unanimously to approve the canonization path for Sister Thea. A few days later, on November 18th, 2018, Bishop Joseph R. Kopach read an edict during the Mass at the cathedral in Jackson. An edict. The Diocese of Jackson would lead the investigation into Thea's life, and the Diocesan Commission would conduct interviews and examine her life and writings to determine whether she lived a life of virtue. Sister Thea taught us what it means to be a universal church. She believed that Black culture could and should be a part of the church. We can only truly be church universal if we are inclusive of our different cultures. The Catholic Church is a welcoming place for all seekers, and it is up to us to make sure that all are welcomed and that our cultural diversity is represented and embraced. As Sister Thea said, and would say to us today at Holy Spirit Catholic Community, "Do you hear me, church?"